I think what this is a cover. You know, people say, okay, because we don't believe that Jephthah's daughter, whatever took place to her, are the sons of God in Genesis 6, because we don't have unanimity on what the Bible is saying, you know, on whether it's an ablative or a genitive, whether it, you know, what usage of the lid cases it is in a particular passage, because we're not all in the same exact usage of the aorist tense, a particular aorist tense in a verse.
There's my excuse to fellowship with Catholics.
Right.
Because you're inconsistent.
Right. Right. So in other words, because we're not we're everythingists, and because we're obviously now having essentials and non-essentials. We're saying the Jephthah thing is a non-essential, and here now I get to do whatever I want to do. When you know that's just a game that's being played. And you know that I'm not going to give into. You know, with you know how exactly we practice courtship, I don't know really. Well, I know we're probably you know pretty much the same because we're in the same church. Okay, I don't know exactly what you guys say about that. We're probably
my wife and I still court.
You still court? Okay.
If you'll bring me $1 million, you can marry one of my daughters. It's my position. Dowry.
Okay. But, you know, okay, so the church is going to decide. Our goal isn't like just to be cutting off from everybody either. So our church is going to be deciding whether this is going to dishonor God. You know, we talked about God earlier, where this is actually violating His word, the doctrine's changing, the practice is changing. But it is not to say, okay, well now we've opened the door to rank doctrines and we're only going to break fellowship, you know, over the major doctrines, you know, that are broken, but the non-essentials don't matter. And we're saying they're non-essentials because I don't break fellowship with Pastor Malinek on his divorce and remarriage position, when actually we would break fellowship with him on a divorce and remarriage position, but it happens to be the position that our church, which is the pillar and ground of the truth, says is the position. What is doctrine? I think is part of what it is. Doctrine is not what the meaning of because of is in Acts 2:38. I mean, you get your doctrine from understanding what that is, but that is not your doctrine to understand what the particular Greek grammar of, or you know what the usage of a particular subject or noun is in there. And so, I mean, our goal is not just to break fellowship, so we're wanting to stay in fellowship if we can, but if something is actually violating doctrine, which our church is going to determine what that is, then that would be an issue. And I think the closed communion issue came up, and we've kind of had a discussion about that. I think everybody here is closed communion, okay, but would we break fellowship with somebody that's close? We've had that discussion. I'm not going to talk about that, but a church has to decide what it's going to break fellowship. That doesn't mean that it's ignoring or saying that some doctrine or practice is of lesser importance and therefore opening the door for all sorts of different kinds of beliefs and practices. And I think that's what the whole issue ends up being about. I don't mind going further and discussing this with people. I don't think whatever I say is going to be enough for some people because they want to be able to
they want to weigh out.
not separate with anybody.
Doesn't 1 John, doesn't he put the emphasis on the walk?
Yeah.
It's on the walk, You walk like this, you behave like this, based on the walk. So again, like with a divorce, Pastor A believes divorce is allowed maybe in one scenario or two scenarios. Pastor B says it's never allowed, but they both agree that they both hate divorce, they both discourage it. Even Pastor A, who says God does allow it, he's convinced of that. His counsel consistently to people who've even endured those things is don't get divorced.
Yeah.
Really, don't do it. Even though he believes maybe you technically could, don't do it, because he starts his position with God hates putting away. Totally different than a guy who's recommending divorce attorneys, things like that.
Yeah, but the whole point of the issue, obviously, with between me and Pastor Malinek is here I am continuing in fellowship with him. So our consistency in our doctrine of separation becomes a basis for someone else being able to do almost anything that they want.
Take it even wider and wider.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that?
We shouldn't build anything on, well, it seems like he's inconsistent, so therefore I can do this.
Yeah.
That's just a poor way of living and practicing. It doesn't glorify God. It's not wise thinking.
Next question. If a church receives into membership a person disciplined from another church, please comment on how that affects that receiving church's fellowship horizontally with the disciplining church other fellowshipping churches, and then also vertically, the receiving church's fellowship with Christ.
Okay, because I don't want to start everyone. Pastor Sutton's going to start this one.
I think the classic passage on dealing with this issue is 1 Corinthians 5 with the man in fornication. And there Paul says, verse 6, your glorying is not good, know ye not that a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. So the leaven in that church was the unrepentant sin of this man and their toleration of him. And that was bad. They thought they were handling it well. Paul said, your glorying and how you're dealing with this is not good. So the command is, purge out therefore the old leaven. So when you remove the old leaven, what happens? Well, that you may be a new lump. You're refreshed. You're whole again. And then he cites Christ or Passover, Christ is sanctified, so Christ is pure. So, okay, so you purge out that leaven. And that leaven, say, goes to another church and joins the church, unrepentant still of that sin, he's still leaven. And so when he joins that church, now he's leaven the other church. And so now that church has issues. So I think if there's continued fellowship, you're really defeating your purpose in disciplining him out of the church to begin with.
Well, another area that is really indicative of how to answer these things is Matthew 18. We've got a situation where we've got a brother that shall trespass against. All right, and we go to him alone. If he doesn't hear you, then we go to him with 2 or 3. Verse 16 says, if he neglects to hear the 2 or 3. And Galatians 6 tells us those 2 or 3 are probably some very wise people. They're not just anybody in the gossip club. So they are probably going to be some elders in the church who know how to handle things. And then verse 17 says, if he neglect to hear those 2 or 3, then you take it to the church. If he neglect to hear the church, then he's to be a heathen and a public man. Verse 18 really nails it. He says this, and I'll quote it. Verily I say unto you, whatsoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Obviously that's not salvation, because we can't save people and cause people to lose their salvation. But what that is that's church membership. So here's what verse 19 says. Again, I say to you that if 2 of you, that's probably the 2 wise men that accompanied the situation, 2 of you shall agree on earth as touching anything they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. What the Lord does is He promises to substantiate the authority that He gave that local church. So if that local church in your situation took 1 Corinthians 5 man out and he was leavened and they removed him, God put His stamp on that. It matters really not what the other church does. God has put His authority behind what He said, it will be done of them in heaven. If God's done it in heaven, that settles it. If another church assumes that that's not an issue, that God won't do that, that may well be a separating issue. And as things go, I'm saying that kind of tongue-in-cheek because there's a lot of different scenarios that can get involved in that. But if it is a staunch, they do not respect the authority that God gave Church A, Church B does not respect it, that could well be a call for needing to separate from over that issue.
Don't forget verse 20. For where 2 or 3
I didn't forget that.
are gathered. You read that? I should pay attention. I want to make a point on that. Bear in mind, in the midst of them, what do you usually see when you do this? The one goes out saying, well, I don't care if they put me out of the church. I've still got Jesus. Right? Where's Jesus? He's with the church. And they'll say, but I've still got Jesus. Jesus is with the church. So I'm glad you read that, brother.
If God is to be pleased, and you're supposed, and for Him to be pleased, leaven has to be kept out of the lump. If He goes to another church, you can't fellowship with that church now, because that church now has leaven in it.
That's
I
right.
mean, God can't be pleased, so you have to go about actually separating from that church. And I think that's where the leaven thing comes in.
And it's a known leaven. You know,
Yeah.
we may not know what's going on in another church, and you know, we don't know if we should or shouldn't
And we don't
this
judge
fellowship,
that.
because we can't see inside, but
Right.
when we know it's happened, then it's an issue.
Yeah, we don't judge what we don't know.
Yeah.
A common thing that you'll hear today is, well, if they go to the other church, then they'll be able to be blessed there at least, and everything will go well for them there. If they go to the other church, at least they'll be somewhere where they'll be hearing the Word of God. And why can't you just understand, that it'd be okay for them if they went to that church? At least they'd be hearing preaching now, and they'd at least be in another good church, even though they're not in yours.
I got that from the other churches faster. Well, don't we want them to be fed and so forth?
Right.
I want them to repent.
Well, and actually, I mean, that's like, the verse in the Bible that teaches that whole thing that I just said. It's actually not.
Second opinions.
It's not in the Bible, so the whole point is obeying the Bible. I mean, that's what we're hearing Eric to do. That we're talking about not my will. This preach this morning. We're wanting His will. His will is in the Bible. That is actually not His will for you just to allow a guy that's you just put on the church, a person you just put on the church, then to go to another church, and then, you have to separate from that church. I mean, the principles say that you have to. That's as clear as it gets. It's not fun to do, but I say fun because I think you can have joy to do anything that God wants you to do, but, it's not something you want to have happen.
Let me just address, because the second half of that question said something about and other fellowshipping churches. This is a scenario that I think you have to be very careful with, is if my church has an issue with your church and we have to separate, I don't then have the right to take aside these three churches and say, hey, he's bad news, we all need to separate from him.
That's a good point.
Because then I've presumed that I have some sort of hierarchy system going. I think that's just as wrong as anything else. If I have to separate, it probably is a one-on-one. Now, there may be times where a little information passed on may be necessary if we have a real problem. But anyway, I don't know the final answer, but I know that's an area of caution there.
Actually, on that, what I would say though is, and I agree with that. I mean, you can start to develop some sort of hierarchical situation, but what I think will happen is this, because I've seen this in the real life. I'm sure you guys have too. The thing is that the church you're going to separate from, because they've taken in your leaven, they've taken in your disciplined member. They think, oh, so what, they're separating from us. I still have all these other people that agree with me out here that don't even care about it, and they all say I'm okay by taking them in. Well, I think, that's where, obviously at some point, I think it's a matter of, are you in fellowship with those other churches? If you are in fellowship with those other churches, literally in fellowship with them, now you would possibly have to think about separating from them. And I say possibly because I think in certain situations, there's probably two things here. One of them is, okay, do they really know everything that they need to know here? But yeah. I don't know. I think ultimately it's about authority. If they say they're in fellowship with us, I don't think there's going to probably be fellowship with them anymore. I know this is where you get into second-degree separation and that kind of thing. But
something that would weigh into this? In that scenario you presented, if, let's say that his church received a disciplined member from you, and you know that I'm in fellowship with them, I think in a sense you owe it to me, now not to tell me what to do about it, but I think you owe it to me to tell me you should beware this man and his church are receiving disciplined people. Because Jesus said, as you would, that men would do unto you, do ye also even unto them. And I would want to know that I'm getting yoked up with leaven. And so you should want me to know that. But it would go back to motive. It's not for salacious gossip purposes. It's not to paint him in the worst light possible. But to say, I know that you want to have purity in your church, Bobby. You want to be careful who you yoke with. And unfortunately, this brother he's got leaven in the lump. And it's not like we're guessing. We know this for a fact, full knowledge of it. And we think you're going to want to know this so that you can protect your church that the Lord's made you the bishop of. So, but then beyond that, if I say, okay, thank you, I sure appreciate that, and then I still maintain fellowship, you can't threaten me or anything like that. You shouldn't do that because that's like a hierarchy. But yet you could say, well, we do have to withdraw from you because you've allowed... You're going to keep working with someone that's allowing leaven, and that's why we need a lot of wisdom, don't we? We've got to be careful.